Welcome to Catalyst Chats, where leaders spark ideas, share wins, and tackle people challenges that shape the future of work.
And today I have the privilege of speaking with Shirley Engelmeier. Shirley is the CEO and founder of Inclusion Inc. Shirley, I would be lying if I said I haven't been fangirling over you a bit here, just with your experience in the DEI space. So I'd love it if you could share an introduction.
Lindsey, I'm just delighted to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. And I think this topic is so important. The way that Inclusion Inc. had approached this work was business-centric. It doesn't have anything to do with all the cultural madness that is going on right now. That inclusion is a business strategy to drive engagement, innovation, retention, and productivity. So I would say that if you want me to just jump in, I would say we're in the throes or the impact of an ideology, and we keep getting slapped upside the head on the results of it. And I think for me, it's the only way that I can explain what the heck is happening.
Today, it seems like DEI is a surprisingly controversial topic. You've been in this space since 2001. I'd love to get your thoughts on why now, specifically, it feels so controversial and how we can maybe change that, especially within the HR space.
Yeah, I think it's way beyond controversial. There's been forces working on this for a long time. Right now, they're trying to make it illegal in the Department of Justice. You know, when you ask the question, what can HR do? I every day scratch my head on that because senior leaders are terrified of it. And I say, but wait a minute, what is DE&I?
Yeah.
Inclusion. We did a global study that said, it's simply, hey, what do you think, Lindsey? You're the one that does the job.
Yeah.
You know, there's a top 5 inclusion behaviors that drive 20% improvement in innovation, 25% improvement in employee engagement, 10% in productivity, and your employees are 4 times more likely to stay. Who does not want that? And then you look
How
at
is it a bad thing?
Yeah. And then if you look at the D, that's simply the differences that are needed for the shifting marketplace. So in the U.S., 1/3 of the spend comes from multi-ethnic, multiracial people. Don't hire me to figure out how to effectively get that spend. I know these same people, if you ask them, do you want to maximize your profitability? They'd say yes, and yet their hardest issue, look at what's happening with immigrants, look at what's happening generally with people of color, and the assumption that any person of color who's in a high job is there strictly as a check the box. And equity might have just thrown the naysayers like, they just couldn't take it when equity came to it. And honestly, I wish the language had not changed to DE&I. I wish it had stayed as inclusion and diversity, which if you do those properly, it will result in equity. Because the misunderstanding is that if you're a person of color, if you're an immigrant, if you're a woman, we could go on and on with those. I'm not trying to diminish by not mentioning. We got there simply because of that characteristic. And it's absolutely false.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting time. And in the HR space, I think that there's been what felt like a fairly sudden, I don't think it was by any means, but it almost felt like a sudden shift where go back to, 2020 with the pandemic and the BLM movement and all of the other conversations that were happening. It was such a focus, and it felt like companies were really trying to at least double down in the DEI space. Fast forward, here we are 5 years later, and it feels like this drastic turn where it's now being diminished. And I think a lot of us are sitting here a bit confused, and we don't have to get into how or why we got here, but I'd just love your thoughts on where do we go from here? How do we continue to make sure that this is a critical part of what we do in the HR world, whether it's from hiring or just making sure that the right people are at the table, because often they're not. And where do we go from here?
Well, I think I'm a big fan of truth telling. In fact, I have a new body of work coming out called how courageous leaders win in an age of backlash. And
Yeah.
part of human resources role has always been, even though it's much harder now, to tell the truth about things. The difficulty is the backlash has been so great. We'll use the Target Costco example. Target said, ooh, we're going to cut our program. They were an icon of
Yeah.
inclusion and diversity. They're down 5%. Costco said, no, we need it. It's our customers, they're diverse, our employees are diverse. They're up 22%. What do people not get about that? So if you think about one of the things that we've done the whole time is separate what the words mean and give people the skills. So if you're thinking about inclusion, hey, a frontline person, you're doing this process. What do you think about how we might do it? We don't care if you're pink, purple, anything. We just know that previously, and now maybe again, very hierarchical cultures, they make the decision and it just goes down. And I will come back to this like over and over and over. In a multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational society, people can't all be white men in leadership roles. Simply, it's not, look, I'm married to a white man. I have 2 sons that are white men. I want them to be highly successful. But all the talent no longer resides in one population group.
Right.
And that, what are your, this is my phrase, key employee demographics that are required for your growth. And it's not an affirmative action thing. It's not a check the box thing. It's about getting people that are as competent. They just happen to have a different layer of identity. So
totally.
Your original question, which I really didn't answer in there, is what do HR people do? I think if HR people, you don't have a sponsor on the business side who can help you translate what you're doing to business results, make that your number one goal. HR people have a really hard job. They've always had a really hard job. They're expected to be business partners. Let's take an example of recruiting or hiring. They're expected to go out and help find a slate. When the decision's made, they barely get to have input in a lot of cases. The line manager makes that decision anyway. Now, it's a lot of things like that for HR that HR ought to be central and critical, and they must have the protection of a senior leader that's really well respected to say, wait a minute, listen to what Lindsey's saying. We are not hiring gays, lesbians, women, people of color to do them a favor. We're doing it because it's reflective of our consumer base, and we're not doing very well on that.
Totally. Yeah. I think you're spot on with that, and I think it's critical, right? Like what I continue hearing you say is that we are only as good as our experiences and our worldview, and we have to have others to help broaden that view and that experience. And without that, we can't be better as companies. We can't serve our customers better. We can't be, in my opinion, just better people.
You know, and I think there's power in calling out where the madness is coming from. I remember in a little anecdote here in 2023 in the summer, I was in Orlando and I was working with a group of senior leaders. And when I came in, and everywhere, if you've been in the Orlando airport lately, it's Disney everything, you know, and I'm thinking, how is the governor of this state making a fight with his largest business contributor? So in the session, I said, like in 32 seconds, it's hard for me to understand how people are so upset and they are using this word woke, which I think if you're woke, you understand the business opportunity. And the entire group of very high senior leaders went, oh, I can't believe you said that. Now, in 25 years, I've been roasted twice by somebody. That was one of them. Why did I get political? I wasn't being political, whether it's been made political. So where did all of that come from? I think there's a group of people from this Christian nationalist, very highly influential group that don't like progress for women, that don't like progress for whatever people of color. So after the George Floyd murder, which happened like 5 miles there from my house, they hunkered down to flip the script. So the Claremont Institute is one of the most vocal behind the scenes. And what they did is they said, we're going to take the civil rights legislation, but we're going to say that it's white people who are being discriminated against. And every single state that has gone anti-DEI, they're taking a package of legal materials that have been designed for state legislatures to change. It's different if it comes to business. I kept thinking when, you remember last summer when about 6 or 7 companies fell, and Harley Davidson and John Deere, and I'm going, why don't you take your brilliant marketing people internally and externally say, the way our stock's going to grow is if we sell more, Coors was another one, more beer.
Yeah.
And the group of people who buying it is changing. That's why we're doing this.
Right. Yeah. And embracing it and really making it a point, a public point versus shying away from it and being fearful of change.
So I think that one of the things that has to happen is says, let's peel this back. Why were we doing this in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, America is based on diversity and immigration and opportunity, and it feels like we are steering from that.
There are the people that want women not even to be in the public square. They want to be back in the 50s. Okay, except what are you going to do with all the money that people who are spending who aren't white men? And then there's the other group of us that says, wait, we're a multicultural, multi-ethnic, fast, have been an economic charger worldwide because of that.
Yeah.
And we're walking away from that. I mean, California is the best example. 4th largest economy in the world.
Yeah, it's huge.
And bet more than 21 states put together. They're embracing, there is no majority there.
Yeah.
There are all minority segments. They also have the greatest scientists, the most Pulitzer Prize winners. And I'm sorry if it hurts somebody's feelings that all those aren't white men.
Yeah.
Right? But they're just not.
Yeah. Definitely a personal problem for anyone that's offended by that. But well, and I think the work that you do at Inclusion Inc. is so important. And you've been in this space for longer than most of us have been familiar with the term diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd love for you to share a bit more too about what Inclusion Inc. is and what work you're doing currently and where you hope to be in 2 to 5 years.
Yeah, until, I'll tell you the exact date. January 24th of 2024, a New York Times article, it was like an expose that came out about the Claremont Institute and all of these things, private, fringe, right, fringe, whatever you want to call it, political or religious, said we're way off track here with our focus. We cannot be giving this special treatment to women, people of color. You've heard all the crazy focus on trans. There's not even that many trans people in America, but we are in a frenzy about it. For me, the language is poison now. So in this next body of work that I'm doing, most of my work's been in leadership anyway, Lindsey, and just a side journey. Well, my greatest passion was when I could get senior leaders who were put in a tough spot because nobody actually really explained this to them in business terms. Why does inclusion matter for your business? Why does diversity? So they always felt uncomfortable. Mostly white men, when they go, oh, wow, I finally get what this has to do about business. That is. And so I feel like businesses are sabotaging themselves right now by reacting to, they're not even aware that it's an ideology they're reacting to, but they're supposed to comply. And so my whole shift, I think I trained or coached like 23,000 leaders in the last 5 years. Yeah. My whole shift is going to be, sadly, to using only leadership language and leadership skill set. I don't believe it's possible unless you have a board behind you and a C-suite behind you. In the case like Costco, I'll just use that for simplicity, that says, no, this is how we're growing, that you can even consider talking about it.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And I'd be curious too, if you have any advice for leaders I think there are leaders who do really care about the DEI space, and they want to create more diverse teams. They want there to be more inclusion in their work environments. I think there can be a fear of how they talk about DEI, especially if they are white. What advice would you give those leaders?
I would stop using DEI. I would say, I would reframe, and I'd reframe on, do we want a culture of inclusion? Because if we get everybody's voice heard, and if they're not afraid to say what's on their mind, which is another issue that's come up, we know from our research, the same I gave you before, it's going to drive engagement 25%. Keep your talent's going to stay at 4 times the rate the time you want. Let's separate. Inclusion is how I work day in and day out. It's neutral to any dimension of diversity. Then I'd say, and get business language that works for you. If you're retail, it's like a no-brainer. But, if you're an engineering company, you may not have the talent in America to get all the engineers you have. So what are the key employee demographics that are required for your growth? We worked with a couple construction companies, and they had to, from traditional days, radically modify, who was working on construction sites. There weren't enough white men to hire to work. So it's not doing a favor. So you have to keep coming back to, why are we doing this? Why did we do that? What's the point? And the other thing is, have the courage to step up when disinformation happens. When Harley Davidson was nailed on X, it was false, big fat lie that they were giving employees money to have trans surgery for their kids. But that went wild. Why didn't you do a PR campaign on that? And it's not just happening in DE&I that are saying, wait a second, that's insane.
Right. And this impacts everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I keep hearing from you is curiosity. You have to be curious as a leader, as an employee, as someone in the HR space to understand what decisions you're making and why, and continuing to ask that. And I think systemically, right, that's really important of if you've always been operating a certain way, why? And I think a lot of people are comfortable with the status quo. And I think that is also probably one of the biggest hurdles in this space.
Yeah, and I think your earlier point that you made about getting called out for talking about it, get help from an HR professional to message this, well, we have to get X number of people. No, that's not what we're doing. We're saying that for us to hit our growth target, whatever that is, whether that's a construction company or a retailer, we have to look like who lives in America, or we have to actively search outside of America. And it has to be a business-centric message. That sounds like rocket science to some people when we talk to them, Lindsey. Oh, this has something to do with business? Yeah, and it's going to make you better leaders, too.
Totally.
Because people, where I think they were willing to take risks after the murder of George Floyd and the DEI, they are now terrified to talk about it because they don't know if a lawsuit's going to come their way, which let's just not even go there. None of that should be happening.
Yeah, totally.
So it is, and again, the backlash is real. And I think the companies that are standing up and saying, excuse me, this is how we do business. We care about the environment. We want to improve our sales. It's a super easy message. But you have to have the backbone to carry it forward. And going back to HR specifically, you need a partner that will have your back.
Yes.
When you start to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Yeah. Well, and with this, again, I keep referring to it as a shift. I don't know that it is, but it feels like a change in the direction, at least over the past 5 years. I'd love to understand if you're willing to share what challenges you're facing as a business leader during this time.
Well, it is not a shift. It is an intentional murder.
Yeah, okay. I like that.
Yeah, it's not a shift. It was a shift when we went before George Floyd to George Floyd, and my naive self said, oh, people finally get it.
Here we go. Yeah, it felt like it's going to happen.
20 years I've been doing this and nobody gets why it's important, and it's always a hard sell. Our business has been radically impacted. We have to change all of our language. If we're talking about, like you see a thing behind me on inclusive leadership, we might be able to get by with using that, but we might have to change it to coaching leaders on skills for the new normal or something like that. And so that's why I'm in the process of making this huge pivot to say, leaders, the skill set that is needed for leaders now is different than it was 1 year ago. And the place that I start with that is, back in COVID, leaders really stepped up. They took risks. We had 2 professional service clients who said, we will never be remote. Well, 1 week after COVID, they were entirely remote, right? So the willingness, now contrast that courage in action because they need it for their business, not because they're just trying to be a superhero.
Yeah.
And contrast that with, where are the voices today? They're not there. And so unless we can undo what Project 2025 has brought forward, which is the Heritage Foundation, and they're just happy as clams that this has happened and gutting everything possible, any reference to accomplishments in the military by women, people of color, immigrant Americans. So I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm trying to say, we got to wake up. We have to tell the truth that this was about business and that what companies are doing is literally business sabotage on themselves by not standing up to this. And it's hard to say, wait, I'm a smart person. I've been propagandized. Yes, we all have been. And then how did it happen? If that's important for you to get take the right steps and stand up and have truth to power. But in my time of doing this work, I have never been more bleak about it. And one thing that people say, oh, no, we're all still doing it. We're just changing the names. No, you're not.
Yeah.
There's tens of thousands of people out of work from this. So we're not changing the names. We are caving to a pervasive, what 5 years ago would have been fringe ideology and acting like it's normal.
Yeah. It's part of me is like, okay, if you can't just want to be a better person, which to me is what this is about, then at least see the business side of it.
Well, and again, I can't speak to how this behavior is supposedly seen as Christian.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a master's in divinity. I'm not by any chance, a Bible scholar, but I'm going, wait, what are Jesus's words? You're supposed to feed the poor. You're supposed to provide homes for them. You're supposed to comfort them.
Yeah.
Well, how does that fit into this ideology? Yeah, so I don't really think it's Christian, which would mean about Jesus and doing good deeds. I think it's about some power grab to a time that maybe never really existed. You know, I'm older than you, so that when I started out, every place I looked, there were no women in leadership. Yeah. I was always the first. I was the only. And then people of color, the same thing. Mm-hmm. And the world's radically changed, so that should be changing with it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're brave to bring the topic up, and hello, HR people, I'm not trying to totally depress you. I am saying, though, I'll recap, get your person who believes that the reason that you're looking for difference in who works there, who gets promoted, is for the business reasons that you need within your organization. And that the reason you want to include people is because you're going to improve every aspect of your business. Now, they have to do that in a way that makes sense for them, but they can be pretty small. And in fact, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm redefining woke as a positive instead of a cultural insult as a leadership strength.
Yeah, I love that. I'm excited to hear more about
You're
that.
woke. I am woke. I want you to maximize who lives in America now. I want you to take advantage of the best talent. I want you to grow your business at the highest level.
Yeah. Well, with that, while we have a bleak outlook, unfortunately, on what's happening right now, I'd love, in Shirley's perfect world, if you could connect with every leader, what would you want them to walk away with? And where would you like us to be able to look back on in 5 years and say, okay, this is how we've moved forward?
So I have the part I really wouldn't say to leaders. I'll tell you that first, and then I'll have the part that I would say to leaders. I say, wake up! What are you doing? Why are you caving to this? You're losing customers. You're losing all the great brand likability that you've had for all these years. Your numbers are down. Why don't you stand up and figure out why this matters for your business? I probably wouldn't do the wake up to them, but in the body of work that I'm about maybe 40% of the way through, I'll say, here's all the research that says everything that's happening now is negative for your business. Here's all the research that says if people support, in this case, creating a culture of inclusion and knowing they need diverse talent to drive to meet their business outcomes, how their numbers are doing better. They have been courageous leaders. So what in your organization has stopped you from having the courage to do this? Because there's a business case for every single business in America, in the world, to be caring about this.
Totally. That's great.
And I wish I had a magic wand and Project 2025 didn't exist, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, we can dream one day. Hopefully people can just care about others and feel like differences bring us together instead of bringing us apart.
I heard a guy from Canada who is very outspoken about what's happening, and this is a political comment, about tariffs towards Canada. His name's Shirley Engelmeier, and he used to be like the governor of Ottawa. He said, we embrace inclusion, diversity, and equity because we know it's one of our greatest strengths as a country. It's not easy, but we work with it.
I love that.
Yeah.
What a beautiful perspective.
Move to Canada? No.
Yeah. Oh. Well, Shirley, I'm so grateful for your time. I'll just kind of open it up to you and see if there's anything else that you want the audience to walk away with.
It is literally, it is not a shift. It is an active death blow to this. And my hardest thing in this is how do I keep my cool while I'm trying to explain that? Because in business terms, it's real easy. Do you want 1/3 of the spend in the U.S.? Okay, then you need to have multicultural, multi-ethnic people working for you. I mean, since January 24, I've really been working towards relanguaging this in a way that makes sense for business leaders. However, a lot of the decisions that are being made may be by leaders with their legal department. What's going to happen to us if we do this? And I'm going to repeat myself. Use your genius that got you in the market leader spot you are to explain to your employees and to the world why you care about them. That's what Costco did.
Great example. Yeah.
Thanks for having the courage to take this on. I hope we haven't depressed every one of your listeners.
I'm still hopeful. I will remain hopeful and, optimistic that we can get there one day.
Thank you for listening to Catalyst Chats. Like, share, and don't forget to follow.